I stood alone at my wife's funeral while the freezing Seattle rain soaked through my black wool coat. My children sat in their heated SUV 50 yards away, checking their stock portfolios. I thought that was the lowest moment of my life. I was wrong. The next morning, they came for my home. They wanted the $2.4 million estate I built with my own hands. They thought I was just a grieving 70-year-old man ripe for the picking. But they forgot one thing. My wife, Catherine, did not leave that house to them. She left them a trap, and they walked right into it. Before I tell you how I destroyed their inheritance, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated you. The rain in Seattle does not wash things away. It just makes everything heavier. The mud at the cemetery clung to my dress shoes like lead weights as I watched the casket lower into the ground. I am Harrison Bennett, 70 years old, a retired structural engineer. I have spent my life calculating loads and stresses, making sure buildings do not collapse under pressure. But as I stood there watching the earth cover the only woman I ever loved, I felt my own internal pillars beginning to buckle. I looked over my shoulder. The engine of the black Lincoln Navigator was running. I could see the exhaust plumbing in the cold air. Inside, my son Preston and my daughter Mallory were warm. They had not stepped out of the car, not once. Preston was on a call, probably shouting at some crypto exchange support line about his failing investments. Mallory was adjusting the ring light on her phone, likely preparing a sad selfie for her followers. They were waiting for me to finish so we could move on to the reading of the will. That was all that mattered to them, the paperwork. I drove myself home that afternoon. The silence in my vintage Mustang usually brought me peace, but today it felt suffocating. I needed to get back to the house. Our house. The 2-story Craftsman estate in Queen Anne that I designed myself 40 years ago. Every beam, every joint, every reinforced concrete footing was calculated by me. It was valued at $2.4 million last week, but to me it was just the place where Catherine's laugh still echoed in the hallways. I needed to sit in her favorite armchair and just smell her perfume one last time. But as I turned the corner onto our street, my heart stopped. There was a massive truck blocking my driveway. It was not a delivery truck. It was a moving van. An Atlas Van Lines 18-wheeler with the ramp already extended down to my pavement. I slammed the brakes, my tires skidding on the wet asphalt. For a second, I thought I was at the wrong house. Maybe the grief was making me hallucinate. But then I saw him. Preston was standing on my porch. He was wearing a beige trench coat, holding a tablet, and pointing at the front door like a general commanding troops. 2 men in blue jumpsuits were carrying out a sofa. My breath caught in my throat. That was not just any sofa. That was the dusty rose velvet love seat Catherine bought for our first anniversary. We had sat on that couch to watch the moon landing. We had sat on that couch when we found out she was pregnant with Preston. I threw my car door open and ran toward them, ignoring the stiffness in my knees. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Put that down! What do you think you are doing?" The movers paused, looking confused. They looked at me, then they looked at Preston. Preston did not even look up from his tablet. He just waved his hand dismissively. "Keep moving, guys. We are on a schedule." The staging team arrives at 4. I ran up the steps and grabbed the arm of the mover. I said, "Put it down. This is my house." "Dad, please." Preston finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, detached. He looked at me the way a landlord looks at a tenant who is late on rent. "You are making a scene. The neighbors are watching." "I do not care about the neighbors," I yelled, feeling the blood rush to my face. "I buried your mother 3 hours ago, Preston. 3 hours, and you are selling the furniture." "We are not selling it, Dad. We are decluttering." He stepped down from the porch and put a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and condescending. "Look around you. This place is massive. It is 4,000 square feet. You are 70 years old. You cannot maintain this. The roof needs work, the garden is a mess. We are doing this for you. We need to clear out the junk so we can stage the property for the market. Junk. He called Catherine S. life junk. I shoved his hand off my shoulder. I am not selling the house, Preston. I told you this last week. I built this house. I am dying in this house. Preston sighed, the kind of long, exaggerated sigh you give a toddler who refuses to eat their vegetables. He tapped his screen a few times and then turned the tablet toward me. It was a digital brochure. The header read Golden Horizon Senior Living Community. I stared at the image. It showed a generic room with a hospital bed and a window overlooking a parking lot. We have already paid the deposit, Preston said, his voice overly smooth, almost rehearsed. It is a great facility, Dad. Round the clock, care-heated floors, bingo nights on Tuesdays. It is better for you. You have been slipping lately. You forget things. You are lonely. I am not lonely. I am grieving, I snapped. And I am not going to a nursing home. Mallory appeared in the doorway then. She was holding a crystal vase. Catherine S. vase, the one she brought back from Italy. Daddy, stop being difficult, Mallory said. She didn't look at me, she was looking at her reflection in the glass of the vase. Todd and Preston did the math. The property taxes alone are going to eat up your pension. If we sell now, while the market is hot, we can secure your future. My future, I repeated slowly. Or your debts. The air went silent. Preston's jaw tightened. I saw the muscle in his cheek twitch. I know about the crypto crash, Preston, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I know you leveraged your house. And I know Todd owes money to people you do not want to keep waiting. You are not doing this for me. You are doing this to liquidate my assets before I am even cold in the ground. Preston stepped closer. He was taller than me now. Younger, stronger. He used his height to loom over me, a tactic he used in boardrooms. Be careful, Dad, he whispered, and the mask of the concerned son slipped just enough to show the wolf underneath. We have power of attorney over Mom's estate. Half this house was hers, and since she died without updating her will since 2005, we control her half. We are listing the house on Monday. He signaled the movers again. Take the grandfather clock next. No, I shouted. I moved to block the door. I stood there shivering in my damp funeral clothes, spreading my arms across the entrance of the home I designed. You are not taking a single thing out of this house. Preston looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Then he said the words that froze my blood. We did not want to do it this way, Dad. But if you are going to be unstable, we will have to call the social worker. Dr. Evans has already prepared the evaluation. What evaluation? I asked, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. The cognitive decline evaluation, Preston said calmly. You are confused, Dad. You are aggressive. You are shouting at people. You are clearly not capable of making decisions anymore. If you do not step aside and let us help you, we will have you declared mentally incompetent by tomorrow morning. Then we won't just put you in Golden Horizon. We will put you in the state facility. And trust me, you do not want to go there. I looked at him. I looked at the son I had taught to ride a bike. The son I had paid tuition for. He was threatening to lock me away in a state asylum so he could sell my house to pay his gambling debts. I looked at the movers waiting awkwardly with the velvet sofa. I looked at the rain falling on the driveway. I realized then that my grief was a luxury I could no longer afford. If I continued to be the sad mourning husband, I would lose everything. I lowered my arms. I stepped aside. Good choice, Dad. Preston smiled a shark-like smile. Why don't you go down to the basement? We moved your cot down there so you would be out of the way. I walked past him without saying a word. I walked into the house that smelled like strangers and dust. I walked past the empty spot where the grandfather clock used to be. But as I headed toward the basement stairs, I was not thinking about surrender. I was thinking about the load-bearing walls. I knew exactly where the weak points of this family were. They thought they were demolishing me, but they didn't know that demolition is my specialty. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold metal of the USB drive I had recovered from Catherine's safe deposit box that morning. They thought Mom hadn't updated her will since 2005. They were wrong. And as I descended into the dark basement, I began to formulate a plan. A plan that would bring this entire house down on top of them. Duide la fun noi jung tip teo cho sin hai duk viet bang ting antu. Onino tus dunga. Bunk van fong so lung tu va din yang tun tien vo yong dok AI maban uko. The sun had barely risen over the Seattle skyline, but the house was already awake. I had spent the night on a folding cot in the damp basement, the same basement where I used to store my old blueprints and drafting tools. My back ached with a sharp, persistent throb that reminded me of my age, but the pain in my chest was far worse. I walked up the stairs, slowly holding on to the railing I had sanded and varnished myself 30 years ago. I could smell coffee brewing. For a brief, foolish second, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe yesterday was just a nightmare. Maybe my children had woken up, realized the cruelty of their actions, and were making breakfast to apologize. Maybe Preston would be sitting at the island with a cup of black coffee waiting to say he was sorry. But as I pushed open the door to the kitchen, that hope died instantly. There was no apology waiting for me. There was only a sharp electronic beep followed by the sound of heavy boots on my hardwood floors. Beep. I stood in the doorway, invisible to them. My son-in-law Todd was standing in the center of the living room holding a digital laser measure. He aimed the red dot at the far wall, the one adorned with the hand-painted wallpaper Catherine had chosen for her 50th birthday. 20 feet across, Todd shouted, his voice echoing in the hollow space. "If we knock out this partition wall, we can open up the entire floor plan. Open concept sells Preston. We need to modernize this dinosaur." Preston was sitting at the kitchen island, not eating, but typing furiously on his laptop. He didn't look up when I entered. He just took a sip from my mug, the one with the faded engineering firm logo, and nodded. "Do it," Preston said, his voice flat and transactional. "Get the contractor here by noon. If we demo the wall today, we can list it as a renovation in progress." I felt a cold rage tighten my throat. I stepped further into the room. My presence seemed to annoy them rather than shame them. "You cannot take that wall down," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Todd turned around, looking at me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. He lowered the laser measure, but didn't put it away. "Good morning to you too, Harrison." Todd said, his tone dripping with condescension. "And why exactly can't we take the wall down?" "Because of the wallpaper, we can scrape that old stuff off in an hour." "No, you idiot," I said, stepping past him to tap my knuckles against the plaster. "Because this is a load-bearing shear wall. I designed the structural integrity of this house myself in 1982. There is a steel column inside this plaster that supports the master bedroom suite upstairs. If you knock this wall down without installing a support beam, the entire second floor will collapse into the kitchen." Todd rolled his eyes and looked at Preston. "Hear that? The engineer is speaking. Apparently the house is going to fall down." Preston finally looked up from his screen. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed with red, but there was no softness in them. Just the frantic energy of a man cornered by his own mistakes. "Dad." "Stop," Preston said. "We know what we are doing. Todd has flipped 3 houses in the last 2 years. He knows more about real estate value than you do." I looked at my son, really looked at him. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the way his leg bounced nervously under the table. "Value," I repeated. "You want to talk about value?" "I had this house appraised last month for estate planning purposes. Do you know what the number was? $2.45 million. I saw Preston flinch. The number hit him like a physical blow. But I heard you on the phone yesterday. I continued moving closer to the island. I heard you talking to that investor friend of yours. You are offering it to him for $1.8 million. You are willing to throw away $650,000 of equity just to sell it fast. Why, Preston? Why are you so desperate to turn my home into cash by the end of the week? Preston slammed his laptop shut. The sound cracked through the kitchen like a gunshot. Because $1.8 million today is better than waiting 6 months for your imaginary price, Preston shouted, standing up. He was taller than me now, looming over the breakfast bar. You don't understand the market, Dad. You are living in the past. We need liquidity. We need to settle the estate expenses. Estate expenses, I scoffed. You mean your gambling debts? You mean the margin calls on your crypto accounts? Preston's face turned a violent shade of crimson. He walked around the island, closing the distance between us. For a moment I thought he might hit me, but he stopped a foot away, his breathing heavy. It doesn't matter, Preston hissed. It is not your house anymore. Mom is gone. You are mentally unfit, and we are the trustees. We make the decisions. He reached into his briefcase, a leather bag I had bought him when he graduated business school, and pulled out a glossy trifold brochure. He slapped it onto the granite countertop. It slid across the surface and stopped right in front of my hand. I looked down. The cover featured a stock photo of smiling elderly people playing checkers in a sunlit room. The text was printed in a cheerful, patronizing font, Golden Horizon Senior Living. I knew this place. It was 40 miles south of the city, located next to an industrial park. It was a warehouse for the forgotten, a place where the state sent people who had no money and no family to advocate for them. The ratio of nurses to patients there was dangerous. The smell of bleach and urine was embedded in the walls. It cost $48 a day, the cheapest facility in the state. This is where you are going, Preston said, his voice regaining that cold, detached control. I picked up the brochure. My fingers crinkled the cheap paper. Golden Horizon, I read aloud. This is a hospice for the indigent, Preston. This is where people go to die alone. It is fully accredited, Todd chimed in, pointing the laser at the ceiling again. And it is within the budget. We cannot afford the fancy places you were looking at, not with the renovation costs we have to cover here. I looked from Todd to Preston. The cruelty was breathtaking. They were selling my $2 million home, stealing the equity, and shipping me off to a place that cost less than a motel room so they could pocket the difference. The van from Golden Horizon will be here at 2 o'clock, Preston said, checking his watch. You have 4 hours to pack. 1 suitcase only. No furniture. No clutter. 2 o'clock, I whispered. Yes, Preston said, turning back to his laptop. And Dad, don't try anything stupid. The neighbors think you are grieving and confused. If you make a scene, we will just have the orderlies sedate you. It will be easier for everyone if you just go quietly. He didn't even look at me. He had already moved on. He was typing again, probably emailing the contractor to come tear down the load-bearing wall. I stood there for a long moment. I looked at the crack in the plaster above the stove, a hairline fracture I had been meaning to fix with a bit of spackle. I realized then that I would never fix it. The house I built, the life I constructed with Catherine, was being dismantled in front of my eyes by the very people we created. I looked at the brochure in my hand one last time. Golden Horizon. Okay, I said softly. Preston stopped typing. He looked suspicious. Okay, I will be ready at 2, I said. I will go pack my things. I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I felt their eyes on my back. I heard Todd chuckle. See, Todd said to Preston. I told you he would fold. He is just an old man, Preston. He knows when he is beaten. I walked back toward the basement door, keeping my head down, letting my shoulders slump as if defeated. But as soon as I closed the door behind me and the darkness of the stairwell swallowed me, I straightened my spine. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was packing a suitcase to go to a warehouse to die. They were wrong. I wasn't going to pack clothes. I was going to my workbench. I checked my watch. 4 hours. 4 hours was a lifetime for an engineer. I had built bridges in less time under enemy fire in Vietnam. I walked past my cot and went straight to the large metal cabinet in the corner of the basement. It was locked with a heavy padlock, one that Preston hadn't bothered to check because he thought it just contained rusty tools. I spun the dial. Left, right, left. The lock clicked open. Inside, sitting next to my old structural diagrams, was a stack of red binders. Catherine's binders. The financial records she had kept hidden for 15 years. And next to them, a small gray device that looked like a garage door opener, but was actually the control unit for the smart home system I had installed last year. A system Preston didn't even know existed. 2 o'clock, I whispered to the empty room. If they wanted to treat me like a tenant they were evicting, then I would show them what happens when you try to demolish a building that still has live explosives inside. I picked up the gray remote. Let the countdown begin. I needed armor. In a house that was rapidly becoming a battlefield occupied by enemy forces, I needed something that felt like me. Something that proved I was Harrison Bennett, the structural engineer, and not the confused old man my children were painting me to be. I went straight to the master bedroom. I needed my watch. It was a vintage Rolex Submariner, a gift from Catherine on our 40th anniversary. She had engraved the back with the words, "Time is structural too." It was heavy, reliable, and precise, just like the life we had built together. I had taken it off last night before collapsing onto the cot in the basement, because I was terrified I might scratch the crystal in my sleep. I knew exactly where I had put it. I had placed it on the nightstand, next to the lamp, aligned perfectly with the edge of the wood. That was my habit. That was my discipline. But when I reached the nightstand, the mahogany surface was bare. I blinked, thinking my eyes were adjusting to the gloom of the rainy morning. I ran my hand over the wood. Nothing. Just a thin layer of dust and the cold realization that my sanctuary had been violated. I dropped to my knees. Maybe I had knocked it over in my grief. I checked under the bed, I checked inside the drawer, I even checked the pockets of the suit I had worn to the funeral. Empty. Panic started to rise in my chest, hot and suffocating. It wasn't just a watch. It was the last thing Catherine had saved for. I marched out into the hallway. Mallory was there sorting through a pile of Catherine's linen tablecloths, deciding which ones were valuable enough to sell on eBay. "Mallory," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Where is my watch?" She didn't look up from the linens. "Which watch, Dad?" "You have so many." "You know which watch," I said, my voice hardening. "The Rolex, Mom's gift. I left it on the nightstand last night. It is gone." Mallory finally looked at me. She tilted her head to the side, her expression shifting into a mask of exaggerated concern that made my stomach turn. "Dad," she said softly, using the tone one uses for a frightened child. "You didn't leave it on the nightstand. You gave it away." Remember, I stared at her. The air in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What are you talking about?" I said. "I would never give that watch away." Mallory sighed and stood up, walking over to place a hand on my arm. She squeezed it gently, but her grip felt like a handcuff. "You gave it to Todd yesterday, Dad. After the funeral. You were crying. You said you wanted him to have it because he is the man of the house now. You said Mom would have wanted him to wear it." I pulled my arm away, as if she had burned me. "That is a lie," I said, my voice shaking. "That is a bold-faced lie, Mallory. I never said that. I hate Todd. I have never liked him. Why would I give him my most prized possession?" Mallory's face hardened. "See, This is what Dr. Evans was talking about. The aggression, the memory gaps. You are rewriting history to fit your mood, Dad. It is scary to watch. Just then, Todd walked out of the bathroom. He was drying his hands on a towel, looking relaxed and victorious. And there it was. The silver band glinted under the hallway lights. My Rolex. It was dangling loosely on his wrist because he hadn't even bothered to have the links adjusted. It looked ridiculous on him, like a child wearing his father's oversized coat. I pointed a trembling finger at him. "Take it off," I commanded. "That is mine. Take it off right now." Todd looked at the watch, then at me, then at Mallory. He let out a short disbelief laugh. "Harrison, come on," Todd said, holding up his wrist to admire the dial. "You made a whole speech about it. It was really touching, actually. Don't ruin the moment now just because you are in a bad mood about the house." I felt a scream building in my throat, a primal roar of frustration. They were doing it right in front of my face. They were rewriting my reality in real time. I lunged forward. I wanted to rip it off his wrist. I wanted to smash his smug face. But Preston appeared from the kitchen, stepping between us like a bouncer at a club. "Whoa, hey," Preston shouted, shoving me back. "Back off, Dad." "Jesus, are you trying to assault him now?" I stumbled back, catching myself against the wall. I looked at the three of them. A united front, a wall of lies. "You are thieves," I spat out. "You are vultures picking a carcass that isn't even dead yet." "I need to get out of here," I said, panting. "I need to go for a drive." I turned and headed for the hook by the front door, where I had kept my car keys for 20 years. The hook was empty. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps now. I turned to the small console table where I kept my wallet. Gone. I spun around. "My keys," I demanded. "My wallet. Where are they?" Preston crossed his arms. "We put them somewhere safe, Dad." "Safe," I yelled. "You are not fit to drive," Preston said calmly, "and you definitely shouldn't be carrying credit cards. You might wander off and buy something crazy or lose them. We are protecting you from yourself." I felt the room spinning. My chest was tight, my blood pressure. I could feel it spiking, a dangerous thumping in my ears. I needed my medication. I pushed past Preston and ran into the kitchen. I yanked open the cabinet above the sink where I kept my lisinopril. Pasta sauce, canned beans, spices. "Where are my pills?" I shouted, tearing through the cans, knocking them onto the floor. "Where did you put my medication?" Mallory leaned against the doorframe, checking her nails. "We moved them, Dad. We set up a medication station in the laundry room. It is safer if we dispense them to you. You might overdose if you forget you already took them." The laundry room. They had put my life-saving heart medication in the laundry room next to the bleach and the dirty socks. I sank to the floor, leaning against the cabinets, surrounded by fallen cans of beans. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was terrified. This wasn't just greed. This was systematic dismantling of a human being. They were taking my time, my mobility, my identity, and my health. They were stripping me down to nothing, so that when the van from Golden Horizon arrived, I would be nothing but a trembling, confused shell that would go willingly. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing. In, out. In, out. I could not let them see me break. If I broke, they won. After a few minutes, the kitchen went quiet. They had left me there assuming I was defeated. I pulled myself up. My knees cracked. I needed to wash my face. I needed cold water to shock my system back into focus. I walked slowly down the hall toward the powder room. The door was slightly ajar. I heard a voice, Mallory's voice, but it wasn't the cold, dismissive tone she used with me. It was tearful, shaky, and filled with a performance of heartbreak. I peered through the crack in the door. Mallory was sitting on the closed toilet lid. She had her phone propped up on the sink against the mirror. A small, portable ring light was clipped to the top of the device, illuminating her face with a soft, angelic glow. She was live streaming. "Guys, thank you so much for the prayers," she whispered to the screen, wiping away a tear that looked suspiciously like she had poked herself in the eye to produce. It is getting worse so fast. He just attacked Todd. He tried to hit him because he thought Todd stole his watch. But Dad gave him that watch yesterday." She paused, reading the comments scrolling on her screen. I know, she said, nodding at the phone. "Dementia is a monster. He is accusing us of stealing his wallet, too. We had to hide the car keys because he tried to drive into the rain in his pajamas. It breaks my heart to see him like this. The dad I knew is gone. We are just trying to keep him safe until the facility comes to pick him up this afternoon. Please just keep praying for us. It is so hard to be the villain when you are just trying to help." I stood frozen in the hallway. I watched my daughter turn my tragedy into content. She was broadcasting a narrative of my insanity to thousands of strangers, laying the groundwork so that if I tried to fight back, if I called the police, if I screamed for help, no one would believe me. I would just be the crazy old man from Mallory's sad TikTok video. A cold clarity washed over me, sharper than the grief, stronger than the fear. They were not just gaslighting me. They were building a cage out of public perception. I stepped back from the door silently. I didn't burst in. I didn't scream. That is what the old Harrison would have done. That is what the crazy Harrison would do. Instead, I turned around and walked back toward the basement. I walked with a purpose. You want to play with perception, Mallory, I thought. You want to talk about stolen things. I touched the pocket of my trousers. The remote control for the smart home system was still there. And inside my head, the blueprints of this house were glowing like a roadmap to revenge. They had taken my watch. They had taken my keys. They had taken my medicine. But they had forgotten to take the one thing that made me dangerous. They had forgotten to take my mind, and it was about to bring the roof down on their heads. I tried to make a phone call to my lawyer, Evelyn Shaw, at 10:30 in the morning. I went to the landline in the hallway, the heavy brass rotary phone that had sat on that mahogany table since 1990. I lifted the receiver, expecting the familiar hum of the dial tone. Instead, there was only a dead, heavy silence. I tapped the cradle once, twice. Nothing. I followed the cord down to the wall jack. It had not been unplugged. It had been cut. The wire was sheared clean off, leaving the copper ends exposed like a severed nerve. I felt a surge of panic. I reached for my pocket to find my cell phone, then remembered. They had taken that too. I hurried into the living room where the wireless router usually blinked with reassuring green lights behind the sofa. It was gone. The surge protector was empty. Preston was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. "The internet is down, Dad," he said without blinking, and I disconnected the phone. "You called the police 3 times last night while you were sleepwalking. You told them there were intruders in the house. We cannot have the squad car showing up here every time you have a nightmare." I stared at him. "I have never sleepwalked in my life, Preston," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "And I did not call the police last night. I was locked in the basement." Preston shook his head with a look of exhausted pity. "See? You do not even remember doing it. This is exactly why we need to move you. You are becoming a danger to yourself." Before I could respond, the front door opened. 2 men in blue coveralls walked in, carrying plastic drop cloths and buckets of paint. They did not look like professional painters. They looked rough, tired, and they smelled of stale cigarette smoke. "Okay, guys," Preston clapped his hands. "Upstairs, master bedroom. Everything comes out. We need that room stripped and primed by noon." My heart hammered against my ribs. "No," I said, stepping forward. You cannot go in there. Catherine's things are still in there. Her clothes, her jewelry box. You haven't let me pack her things yet. We will pack them for you, Dad Mallory said, emerging from the kitchen with a half-eaten apple. We are going to put everything in storage. We need to paint the room neutral gray. That old floral wallpaper gives buyers a headache. Neutral gray. They were going to paint over the floral pattern Catherine had picked out when she was pregnant with Mallory. They were erasing her. I tried to block the stairs, but Todd stepped in front of me. He put a hand on my chest. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a shove disguised as a pat. "Why don't you go back downstairs?" Harrison Todd said, his voice low enough that the painters couldn't hear. "You are in the way. We moved your recliner down there. It is cozy. Go take a nap." I looked at the three of them, my son, my daughter, my son-in-law. They formed a wall of youth and arrogance that I could not break. I was outnumbered. I was cut off from the outside world, and I was tired. I turned around and walked to the basement door. I did not slam it. I closed it softly. The click of the latch sounded like a prison cell locking. I descended into the gloom. The basement was cold. The air smelled of mildew and unwashed concrete. They had shoved my leather recliner into the corner next to the water heater. My cot was pushed against the wall. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. This was my home. I had built the foundation, ensuring it could withstand earthquakes and storms. Now I was exiled to its bowels like an unwanted rodent. I sat in the recliner and closed my eyes. The house above me creaked. I knew every sound this house made. I knew that a creak near the chimney meant someone was walking in the hallway. I knew that a thud near the window meant the wind was hitting the north face. And I knew something else. When I designed the HVAC system for this house in the 80s, I had installed oversized galvanized steel ducts to ensure efficient airflow. Metal carries sound. It carries it perfectly if you know where to listen. I opened my eyes. Directly above my head, running along the ceiling joists, was the main return vent for the living room and kitchen. It was a metal artery that connected the heart of the house to where I sat. I heard footsteps. Heavy. Pacing. That was Todd. I stood up and dragged my heavy recliner underneath the vent. I climbed up onto the armrest, balancing myself precariously. I pressed my ear against the cold, galvanized steel. The sound was tinny but crystal clear. It was like Todd was standing right next to me. "I am telling you I need until Tuesday." Todd was on the phone. His voice was not the arrogant, booming baritone he used with me. It was high, thin, and trembling. "Please listen to me," Todd pleaded. "The old man is signing the papers today." "Yes. Today. We have a buyer lined up for cash. 1.8 million. It is a fire sale. We are practically giving it away." There was a silence on the other end. Todd was listening. I could hear his rapid breathing through the metal. "I know," Todd said, his voice cracking. "I know I said Monday. But the bank needs 24 hours to clear the wire. Tuesday morning. I will have the 400,000 plus the vigorish. Every cent. $400,000. The number hit me harder than the cold basement air. Todd continued, desperation seeping into every word. "No, don't send anyone to the house. Please. My wife is here. The old man is... Look, he is barely lucid. We have him under control. He is going to a facility this afternoon. Once he is gone, the house is ours. I just need you to hold off the guys for 48 hours. He paused again, then a whispered, terrifying submission. "Understood. If the money isn't there by Tuesday noon, you take the car. And the fingers." "I understand." I heard the call end. I heard Todd let out a long, shaky breath, followed by the sound of something heavy, probably a fist slamming onto the kitchen counter. I climbed down from the recliner and sat in the dark. My heart was not racing anymore. It had slowed to a cold, rhythmic thud. For the last 24 hours, I had been trying to rationalize their behavior. I thought they were just selfish. I thought they were spoiled children who didn't understand the value of sentimental things. I thought they were just greedy for an early inheritance. But this was different. This wasn't about greed. This was about survival. Todd was in deep with a loan shark, $400,000 deep. And Preston knew. Mallory probably knew. They weren't selling my house to secure my future. They were selling my house to save Todd's fingers. They were not misguided. They were criminals. I looked around the damp basement. The shadows didn't look scary anymore. They looked like cover. I realized then that the Harrison Bennett who walked into this basement 5 minutes ago, the grieving husband, the confused father, was gone. He had died the moment he heard that phone call. The man sitting in the chair now was not a victim. He was a witness. They had cut the phone line to keep me from calling for help, but they had forgotten that isolation works both ways. If I couldn't call out, no one could call in to warn them. I was not trapped down here with them. They were trapped in the house with me. I stood up and walked over to my workbench. I picked up a roll of heavy-duty duct tape and a pair of industrial wire cutters. Todd needed money by Tuesday. Preston needed me out by 2 o'clock. I checked my watch, my imaginary watch, on my bare wrist. It was 11 a.m. I had 3 hours to turn this house from a quick cash grab into a fortress they would never escape. I looked at the main circuit breaker panel on the far wall. The gray metal box hummed with the electricity that powered their lights, their internet, their coffee maker, and their heating. I walked toward it. "You want to leave me in the dark?" I whispered. "Let's see how you like it." The darkness of the basement was becoming suffocating, so when the smell of roasted garlic and tomato drifted down the stairwell at 6 o'clock, I felt my stomach clench with hunger. I had not eaten since the funeral buffet yesterday. I climbed the stairs slowly, pretending to be the frail, defeated old man they wanted me to be. When I opened the door, the kitchen was transformed. The harsh construction lights were off, and the warm, recessed lighting was dimmed. The table was set with placemats and the good silver. Maria, our housekeeper for 20 years, was nowhere to be seen. Usually at this hour she would be humming while scrubbing the pots, but the sink was empty. Standing at the stove stirring a steaming pot was Mallory. She was not wearing her usual designer athleisure wear. She was wearing an apron over a modest dress, and her hair was tied back. When she saw me, she didn't roll her eyes or check her phone. She smiled. It was a soft, fragile smile that reminded me so much of her mother that I almost faltered. "Daddy, come sit down," Mallory said, her voice thick with emotion. "I made tomato basil soup, your favorite. I sent Maria home early because I wanted to do this myself. I wanted to apologize." I pulled out my chair and sat down. My engineer's brain was screaming that this was a structural anomaly. People do not change their fundamental architecture in 4 hours. But my father's heart was desperate to believe her. I watched her ladle the thick red soup into a bowl. She placed it in front of me along with a piece of crusty bread. "We have been so stressed," Dad Mallory said, sitting across from me and reaching for my hand. "Losing Mom has been hard on all of us. I know we came on too strong with the house and the moving truck. We just want you to be safe. Please forgive us." I looked at the soup. I looked at her teary eyes. I wanted to believe that the daughter I raised was still in there somewhere beneath the layers of vanity and greed. I was starving. My hands were shaking from low blood sugar. I picked up the spoon. "Thank you, Mallory," I said quietly. "That is all I wanted to hear." I took the first bite. It was rich and warm, but there was a slight metallic tang underneath the basil. I hesitated. Mallory was watching me closely, too closely. Her own bowl was untouched. "Is it okay?" she asked, leaning forward. I used Mom's recipe. It is good, I said. I ate. I ate because I needed strength for the war I knew was coming on Tuesday. I finished the bowl. Mallory smiled and went to the counter to pour me a glass of water. 10 minutes later, the room tilted. It started as a heaviness in my fingertips like gravity had suddenly doubled. Then the edges of my vision began to blur. I tried to stand up to take my plate to the sink, but my legs refused to receive the signal from my brain. I slumped back into the chair, gripping the edge of the table. Mallory. I slurred. My tongue felt like it was 2 sizes too big for my mouth. What did you put in the soup? Mallory didn't answer. She just picked up her phone and typed a quick message. The back door opened. Todd walked in, shaking rain off his umbrella. Behind him was a man I did not know. He was short, balding, and carried a black medical bag that looked like a prop from a movie set. He wore a white coat that was slightly yellowed at the collar. Right on time, Todd said, grinning at me. How is the patient? He is ready, Mallory said, standing up and dropping the act instantly. She walked over to the sink and dumped her untouched soup down the drain. I tried to shout. I tried to say, "You drugged me, you witch." But all that came out was a low, incoherent groan. My head lolled back against the chair. I was conscious, terrified, and trapped inside a body that was shutting down. The stranger walked over to me. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask for my consent. He pulled a penlight from his pocket and shined it directly into my eyes. The light was blinding. Pupils sluggish, the man muttered. Significant motor control loss. Disoriented. Nonverbal. He is not nonverbal, I tried to think the words. I am drugged. The man turned to Todd. This is consistent with advanced dementia with episodes of catatonia. I can certify this. Todd laughed a dry, cruel sound. Thanks, Phil. I owe you one. Phil. This wasn't a specialist. This wasn't Dr. Evans. This was probably one of Todd's gambling buddies who lost his license years ago. Phil pulled a clipboard out of his bag. He placed it on the table right next to my paralyzed hand. The document was thick. I could see the bold letters at the top. Certificate of Incapacity and Power of Attorney Transfer. He needs to sign it, Todd said, or at least make a mark. Phil shook his head. He doesn't need to sign. With my medical evaluation attached declaring him incompetent, you two become his emergency guardians automatically. I just need to sign here and here. I watched helplessly as the pen scratched against the paper. The sound was deafening in the quiet kitchen. Scritch, scratch. The sound of my freedom being signed away. The sound of my life becoming their property. Once this is filed tomorrow morning, Todd said, rubbing his hands together, we can access the retirement accounts immediately, right? Phil nodded. Full access. Pension. 401k. Savings. You can liquidate everything to pay for his care. His care? Todd snorted. Yeah, his care. Care of the Four Seasons Resort. Mallory giggled. It was a high nervous sound. Todd, stop it. We have to pay the bridge loan first. Then we can think about a vacation. They stood over me discussing the looting of my life as if I were already a corpse. They talked about selling the vintage Mustang for parts. They talked about which jewelry of Catherine's would fetch the best price at the pawn shop. They talked about putting me in the cheapest room at Golden Horizon so the monthly stipend would last longer. I sat there, drool pooling at the corner of my mouth, tears leaking from my eyes, unable to lift a finger to wipe them away. The anger that had been burning in me all day turned into something else, something colder, something harder. It turned into hate. Let's get him to bed, Todd said. He is heavy. They dragged me up the stairs, my feet bumping against every step. They didn't take me to the master bedroom. They threw me onto the mattress in the guest room, the one with the lumpy springs. They didn't bother to change my clothes or cover me with a blanket. "Sweet dreams," Daddy Mallory whispered. She patted my cheek. Her hand felt cold. They turned off the light and closed the door. I heard the lock click. I lay there in the dark, listening to the rain hammer against the window. My body was lead, but my mind was fighting the drug with every ounce of willpower I had. I replayed the conversation in the kitchen. I memorized the name Phil. I memorized the time. I drifted into a nightmare-filled sleep where walls were collapsing on top of me, and Catherine was calling my name from behind a locked door. When I opened my eyes again, sunlight was slicing through the blinds. My head throbbed with a chemical hangover that tasted like ash. My mouth was dry as sandpaper. I pushed myself up. My arms were weak, but they moved. The paralysis had faded. I looked at the bedside table. There it was. A photocopy of the document. The certificate of incapacity signed by Dr. Philip O'Connell. I picked it up. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. They thought this piece of paper was their victory. They thought it was the lock on my cage. But they had made a fatal error. By declaring me incompetent, they had freed me from the rules of civil society. If I was crazy, I couldn't be held responsible for what I was about to do. I looked at the date on the paper. Today was Tuesday. The deadline. I crumpled the paper in my fist. "You want crazy," I whispered to the empty room. I swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold. I walked to the door. Locked. I didn't panic. I was a structural engineer. I knew that the hinges on this door were brass pins that hadn't been oiled in 10 years. But I also knew that the wood frame around the lock was soft pine. I backed up 3 steps. I focused my rage into my right heel. I am not going to Golden Horizon. I kicked the door. Wood splintered. I am going to war. The sound of the heavy front door slamming shut echoed through the house like a thunderclap. I stood motionless in the hallway, listening as the engine of Preston's SUV roared to life. I heard the gravel crunch under the tires as they backed out of the driveway, speeding off to meet the real estate broker, who was promising them a quick cash deal. They were in such a hurry to sell my life out from under me that they didn't even bother to check if the lock on the guest room door had actually held. They assumed the drug was still coursing through my veins, keeping me docile and paralyzed. They assumed I was a problem that had been solved. I waited until the sound of the engine faded completely into the distance before I moved. The silence that filled the house was heavy, but it was no longer frightening. It was an opportunity. I checked my watch. I had maybe 2 hours before they returned to drag me to the van from Golden Horizon. 2 hours to find the ammunition I needed to survive. I walked straight to the end of the hall, to the door of Catherine's study. This was her sanctuary. It was where she wrote her poetry, where she managed the household accounts, and where she spent hours staring out at the rain, thinking thoughts she never shared with me. Preston had put a heavy-duty padlock on the outside hasp yesterday, claiming he needed to secure the sensitive documents. He thought a $10 lock from the hardware store could stop a man who used to calculate the sheer strength of steel bridges. I didn't bother with the lock. I looked at the hinges. They were standard residential brass hinges exposed on the outside of the frame. It was a rookie mistake. I went to the linen closet where I kept a small emergency toolkit tucked behind the towels. I pulled out a flathead screwdriver and a hammer. I wedged the screwdriver under the head of the top hinge pin. One sharp tap with the hammer and the pin popped up an inch. I pulled it out. I did the same for the bottom hinge. In less than 60 seconds, the door was no longer attached to the frame. I gripped the knob and lifted the heavy oak door, swinging it gently away from the jamb and leaning it against the wall. I stepped inside. The room smelled of lavender and old paper. It smelled like her. For a moment, I felt my knees weaken. The grief I had been suppressing to make room for my anger came rushing back. I ran my hand over her desk, touching the silver letter opener. She loved the stack of unfinished crossword puzzles. But I didn't have time to mourn. I had to think like Catherine. If she knew what the children were becoming, where would she hide the proof? Catherine was not a digital woman. She didn't trust the cloud. She trusted paper. She trusted ink. And she trusted hiding spots that required patience to find. I looked around the room. The bookshelves were full. The filing cabinet was locked, but I knew it only contained tax returns and appliance warranties. I turned to the large oil painting hanging over the fireplace. It was a painting of the lighthouse at Cape Elizabeth, where we had spent our honeymoon. It was the only thing in the room that hadn't been moved in 20 years. I climbed up onto the hearth. I gripped the heavy gold frame and pulled it away from the wall. There was no safe behind it, just the plaster wall. But then I noticed something. The paper backing on the frame itself had been slit carefully with a razor blade and then taped back over. My heart began to race. I peeled back the tape. Inside the hollow space between the canvas and the backing was a thick leather-bound notebook. I pulled it out. My hands were trembling as I opened it. It wasn't a diary of her days. It was a ledger of their betrayal. The first entry was dated 4 years ago. June 12, 2020. Preston asked for $5,000 for a business investment. I gave it to him. I found out today he used it to pay off a debt to a bookie in Las Vegas. He looked me in the eye and swore on his grandmother's. Grave, it was for software. I am starting to see him clearly now. I turned the page. August 4th, 2021. Mallory forged my signature on a credit card application. The bank called to verify. I told them it was a mistake to protect her. I paid the $2,000 bill. She didn't even say thank you. She just said, I owed it to her for not supporting her acting career. I flipped through the pages faster. It was all there. Every lie. Every theft. Every time they had manipulated us. Catherine hadn't been blind. She had been heartbroken. She had been documenting the slow rot of our family, hoping she would never have to use it, but preparing for the day she might. Then I reached the entry from 2 months ago. The handwriting was shaky. She was already sick then. November 1st. I overheard Todd and Preston talking in the garage. They were discussing how much the house would be worth if I died before the new year. They were talking about tax loopholes. They were talking about putting Harrison in a home so they could sell the property quickly. They think Harrison is weak. They think he will crumble without me. They do not know him like I do. But I cannot take the risk. I have set up the trust. I have made the video. I have given everything to Evelyn. I stared at the words. She knew. She knew they were planning to discard me. She had spent her final dying days protecting me from the children we raised. Tears blurred my vision, but I wiped them away angrily. Something fluttered out from the back pocket of the notebook. It was a small cream-colored business card. Evelyn Shaw, attorney at law. On the back in Catherine's elegant cursive were 7 words that chilled me to the bone. Only call when they corner Harrison. She knew this moment would come. She knew I would be standing in this room alone and desperate. I looked at the phone number. I needed to make the call, but I couldn't use the landline they had cut, and they had taken my cell phone. I remembered the toolbox, the big red metal chest I kept in the garage, but I also kept a small specialized kit in the bottom drawer of Catherine's desk for fixing her reading glasses and small electronics. And in that kit, I kept an emergency burner phone. I had bought it 3 years ago when we went hiking in the Cascades, just in case we got stranded. I had kept it charged out of habit. I yanked open the bottom drawer. I shoved aside the boxes of staples and paper clips. There it was, a cheap black flip phone. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up. 2 bars of battery. It was enough. I dialed the number on the card. My breath was shallow. I listened to the ring. 1, 2, 3. Law offices of Evelyn Shaw, a professional voice answered. I need to speak to Evelyn Shaw, I said, my voice raspy. I am sorry, Ms. Shaw is in a deposition. May I ask who is calling? Tell her it is Harrison Bennett, I said. Tell her the wolves are in the house. There was a pause, a shift in the receptionist's tone. Hold please, Mr. Bennett. Do not hang up. 10 seconds later, a sharp, clear voice came on the line. Harrison. It was Evelyn. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded ready. Evelyn. I said, gripping the phone so hard the plastic creaked. Catherine left me a note. She said to call you. I have been waiting for this call, Harrison, Evelyn said. Are you safe? No, I said. They have declared me incompetent. They have a doctor who signed a fake certificate. They are coming back in an hour to take me to a facility called Golden Horizon. They are selling the house today. Listen to me carefully, Harrison. Evelyn said, her voice cutting through my panic like a laser. Do not sign anything. Do not leave the house. If they try to force you out, you make a scene. You make them drag you. I need you to buy me time. How much time? I asked. I can be there in 2 hours with the sheriff, Evelyn said. But I need you to trigger the clause. They need to present the papers to you formally. They need to try to execute the transfer of assets. That is the trap Catherine set. They are bringing a notary at 2 o'clock, I said, looking at the notes in the diary. To sign the deed. Good, Evelyn said. Let them set the stage. Let them think they have won. I will walk in right when the pen touches the paper. But Harrison, you have to hold your ground until I get there. Can you do that? I looked at the diary in my hand. I looked at the painting of the lighthouse. I thought about the load-bearing wall in the kitchen. I can do more than hold my ground. Evelyn, I said, feeling a cold calm settle over me. I am going to give them a show they will never forget. Good man, Evelyn said. I am leaving now. Harrison. Yes. Catherine loved you very much. She bet everything on you being strong enough to survive this. I hung up the phone. I slid it into my pocket, along with the business card. I put the diary back into the hollow space behind the painting and pressed the tape back down. I lifted the heavy door and slid the hinges back into place, tapping the pins down so it looked like it had never been touched. I walked out of the study. I went back to the guest room. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Let them come. Let them bring their doctors and their notaries and their moving vans. I was not the victim anymore. I was the bait, and the trap was about to snap shut. I had barely slid the burner phone back into my pocket when a new sound tore through the quiet morning. It was a sound I knew well, but one that had no business being in my driveway. It was the low, guttural rumble of a heavy-duty diesel engine idling, followed by the metallic screech of a hydraulic winch unwinding. My heart hammered against my ribs. I ran to the window of the guest room and peered through the slats of the blinds. A massive flatbed tow truck was backed up all the way to my garage door. The driver, a man in a greasy orange vest, was dragging a heavy chain and hook toward the open bay. And there she was. My 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback. Candy apple red. I had spent 5 years restoring that car. I had rebuilt the V8 engine with my own hands. I had sanded every inch of the bodywork until it was smooth as glass. Catherine used to sit in the passenger seat with a scarf around her hair, laughing as we drove down the Pacific Coast Highway. That car was not just a vehicle. It was the last vessel of my youth. It was the one place where I was not a father, or a husband, or an engineer, simply a free man. And they were chaining it up like a piece of dead livestock. I forgot about the plan. I forgot about Evelyn's instructions to wait. I forgot that I was supposed to be a frail, confused old man who couldn't walk without stumbling. The rage that exploded in my chest was primal. It bypassed my brain and went straight to my legs. I threw open the guest room door and sprinted down the hallway. I didn't care if my knees hurt. I didn't care if I was barefoot. I flew down the stairs, taking them two at a time. I burst out the front door into the drizzle. The cold, wet air hit me like a slap, but I didn't slow down. "Stop!" I screamed. My voice was raw, tearing at my throat. "Get away from my car!" Todd was standing by the cab of the truck, counting a thick stack of $100 bills. He looked up, surprised by my speed, but he didn't look scared. He just looked annoyed, like I was a fly buzzing around his lunch. "Load it up," he shouted to the driver, ignoring me completely. "We are on a tight schedule." I reached the driveway and threw myself between the tow truck and the Mustang. I grabbed the cold steel chain the driver was holding. "You are not taking this car!" I panted, gripping the metal links until my knuckles turned white. "This is my property. It is not part of the estate. The title is in my name." The driver, a large man with a beard that smelled of stale tobacco, looked at Todd. "You said the old man was a vegetable," he grunted. "This guy looks pretty lively to me." Todd stuffed the cash into his pocket and walked over. He was smiling that oily, shark-like smile. "He is having an episode," Todd said smoothly. "Look at him. He is barefoot in the rain. He doesn't know what day it is. Just hook it up. I have the signed power of attorney right here." "I am not having an episode, you thief," I yelled, lunging at Todd. I wanted to wipe that smirk off his face. I wanted to make him feel a fraction of the pain he was inflicting on me. But before I could reach him, a heavy hand grabbed the back of my shirt collar. It was Preston. I hadn't even seen him coming. He had been hiding in the garage, probably looting my tool chest. "Sit down, Dad," Preston growled. He didn't guide me away. He didn't hold me back. He shoved me. He used his full weight, a man 20 years younger and 50 pounds heavier than me, and he threw me to the ground. I flew backward. My feet slipped on the wet pavement, and I landed hard on the sodden grass of the front lawn. The impact knocked the wind out of me. Mud seeped instantly through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. I gasped for air, trying to push myself up, but my shoulder burned with sharp, white-hot pain. I looked up at them from the ground. My son. The boy I had taught to catch a baseball. The boy I had carried on my shoulders so he could see the fireworks. He was standing over me, wiping his hands on his designer jeans, as if touching me had made him dirty. "Stay down," Preston spat. "You are embarrassing yourself." "Why?" I whispered. My voice was broken. "Why are you doing this? That car is worth $65,000. I appraised it last year." Todd laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. 65 grand in 6 months, maybe, Todd said, kicking the tire of the Mustang. "But I found a guy who pays cash today. 15,000. Quick and clean. 15,000. They were selling my masterpiece, my freedom, for scrap value just to pay off a fraction of their debts. The stupidity of it hurt almost as much as the cruelty. "You are idiots," I choked out. "You are throwing away money." "We are liquidating assets to pay for your diapers, Dad," Preston sneered. "Do you know how much nursing homes cost? We need every penny. We are selling this junk so you can have a bed to sleep in tonight. You should be thanking us, thanking them." I watched helplessly as the driver hooked the chain onto the undercarriage of the Mustang. I heard the winch whine. I watched the car lurch forward, dragging its rear tires because the parking brake was still on. The sound of the rubber screeching against the asphalt sounded like a scream. My car tilted up onto the flatbed. I saw the scratch on the bumper where I had backed into a fence post in 1998. I saw the sticker on the rear window from the national park Catherine loved. Within 2 minutes, it was secured. The driver hopped into the cab and revved the engine. Diesel fumes blew into my face, stinging my eyes. Todd slapped the fender of the truck as it rolled away. "Pleasure doing business," he yelled. I lay there in the mud as the truck disappeared down the street, taking a piece of my soul with it. Preston and Todd turned and walked back toward the house, high-fiving each other like frat boys who had just scored a keg of beer. "Look at him," Preston laughed, glancing back at me. "He looks like a wet dog. We should probably hose him off before the notary gets here." They went inside. The heavy oak door slammed shut. I was alone again. The rain fell harder, matting my gray hair to my forehead, running down my neck. I was cold. I was in pain. I was humiliated. But as I lay there staring at the gray sky, something shifted inside me. For the last 2 days, I had been operating on grief. I had been operating on shock. I had been trying to understand why they were doing this, trying to find some logic, some shred of humanity in my children. I had been crying for the loss of my wife and the loss of my family. But as the sound of the tow truck faded into silence, the tears stopped. My eyes dried. The shivering stopped. A strange calm settled over me. It was the cold, absolute zero of deep space. I pushed myself up. My hand sank into the mud. I grabbed a handful of the wet earth and squeezed it until it oozed through my fingers. They had pushed me down. They expected me to stay down. They expected me to crawl back into the house, begging for a towel, begging for forgiveness, begging for a warm bed in the nursing home. They thought they had broken me, but they forgot what I did for a living. I am a structural engineer. I know that when you apply too much pressure to a structure that is too rigid, it snaps. But if you apply pressure to a structure that is reinforced with steel, it does not break. It pushes back. I looked at the house. My house. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a target. I stood up. I wiped the mud from my hands onto my trousers. I didn't brush off the dirt on my coat. I wanted to wear it. I wanted them to see the mud. I wanted them to see exactly what they had done. I checked my pocket. The burner phone was still there, dry and safe. Preston said he wanted to buy me diapers. Todd said he wanted fast cash. I looked at the empty driveway where my Mustang used to be. "Okay," I whispered. "The sadness is gone. The father is gone." I walked toward the front door, not with the shuffle of an old man, but with the steady march of a soldier returning to the front line. You want a war. You just started one. And unlike you, I don't care about the collateral damage anymore. I reached for the door handle. It was time for the final act. The living room had been transformed into a stage for my execution. They had moved the coffee table to the center of the room and covered it with a white linen cloth. On top of it sat a bottle of Dom Perignon, a platter of imported cheeses that I would never eat, and a stack of legal documents thick enough to choke a horse. A man I did not recognize sat on the edge of the sofa. He was sweating profusely despite the air conditioning, and he kept wiping his palms on his cheap polyester trousers. This was Mr. Henderson, the notary public that Todd had found on short notice. He looked like a man who asked no questions as long as the cash was placed in the envelope up front. I shuffled into the room wearing my grease-stained work jacket. I saw the look of disgust on Mallory's face as she hastily moved her designer handbag off the sofa so I wouldn't touch it. Preston was standing by the fireplace holding a crystal flute of champagne. He looked like a lord surveying his new kingdom. He checked his watch and then looked at me with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Right on time," Dad Preston said, gesturing to the empty armchair they had positioned in the middle of the room like an electric chair. "Come sit down. Mr. Henderson has a busy schedule, so let's get this administrative stuff out of the way. Then we can have a toast to your new chapter." My new chapter. That was their code word for discarding me. I sat down heavily in the chair. I let my mouth hang open slightly and blinked rapidly as if I were struggling to focus. I looked at the documents on the table. The bold letters seemed to swim before my eyes, but I knew exactly what they said. One was a quitclaim deed transferring the title of the house to the Bennett Family Trust, controlled by Preston and Mallory. The other was a voluntary commitment form for the Golden Horizon facility. Todd walked over and placed a heavy fountain pen in my hand. It was my own pen, a Mont Blanc I had used to sign the contracts for the Seattle Suspension Bridge project in '95. They were using my own tools to dismantle my life. "Here you go," Harrison Todd said, his voice thick with false cheer. "Just sign right there next to the yellow sticky note. Press hard. We need 3 copies." I held the pen. I let it hover over the paper. My hand trembled violently. I wasn't acting about the trembling. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was making my entire body vibrate. I was terrified not that I would sign, but that I would leap across the table and strangle him before the cavalry arrived. I looked up at Preston. He was staring at the pen with a hunger that was almost obscene. His eyes were wide, his pupils dilated. He was mentally spending the money already. I looked at Mallory. She was texting, probably telling the boutique at Saks to hold those boots for another hour. I don't have my reading glasses," I stammered. "I can't read this. What does it say?" Preston sighed, putting his glass down with a sharp clink. "We went over this, Dad. It says you are giving us permission to manage the house so you don't have to worry about repairs anymore. It says you agree to go to the facility where doctors can look after you. It is for your own good. Just sign it." I looked at Mr. Henderson, the notary. He refused to meet my eyes. He was studying the pattern on the rug. "Is that true?" I asked him. "Is this for my own good?" Mr. Henderson coughed nervously. "I am just here to witness the signature, sir. I don't draft the documents." I looked back at the paper. I lowered the nib of the pen. The black ink was poised millimeters above the signature line. Preston leaned in closer. "Do it, Dad. Just write your name. Then you can rest. No more worries. No more bills. Just peace." I took a breath. I squeezed the pen. I started to lower it. I could hear Todd holding his breath. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The silence was stretched so thin, it was about to snap. And then it did. Ding dong. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a long, assertive press that demanded attention. The sound shattered the atmosphere in the room like a rock through a glass window. Todd jumped so hard he nearly knocked over the champagne bottle. His face went pale. He looked at the door, then at Preston, terror written all over his features. "Who is that?" Todd whispered, his voice high and frantic. "Is it them? Did they send someone early?" Preston looked annoyed. "Relax, Todd. It is probably the movers with the van for Dad. They are early." I didn't move. I kept the pen hovering over the paper. I knew exactly who it was. Preston marched to the front door. "I will handle it," he barked. He yanked the door open, ready to yell at a delivery driver. "Can I help you?" Preston demanded. I turned in my chair. Standing in the doorway was not a mover. It was a woman in a sharp navy blue suit holding a leather briefcase. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes behind her rimless glasses were cold as steel. Behind her stood 2 younger associates in suits holding video cameras. And behind them, filling the doorframe with his imposing presence, was Sheriff Miller, his hand resting casually on his belt. Evelyn Shaw stepped into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. The sheriff followed her. Preston stumbled back, confused. "Who are you? You can't just walk in here." Evelyn ignored him. She walked straight into the living room, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. She looked at the scene before her. She looked at the champagne. She looked at the sweating notary. She looked at the documents on the table. And finally, she looked at me. She gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. Preston ran after her, his face turning red. "Excuse me, lady," I said, "get out. This is a private family gathering." "You are trespassing, Sheriff. Why are you here? Remove these people." Todd had backed up against the wall, looking like he wanted to vanish. Mallory stood up, phone in hand, mouth agape. Evelyn stopped at the coffee table. She didn't shout. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke with the quiet, absolute authority of a woman who knows the law better than she knows her own children. "I am Evelyn Shaw," she said. "I am the executor of the Catherine Bennett estate, and I am Harrison Bennett's attorney." Preston laughed nervously. Mom's lawyer mom didn't have a lawyer. She was a housewife. And Dad is incapacitated. He can't hire a lawyer. "Look, we have the certificate right here." He pointed to the medical papers on the table. Evelyn picked up the certificate. She glanced at it for a second, then dropped it back onto the table as if it were a used tissue. "Dr. Philip O'Connell," she said. "License suspended in 2019 for prescription fraud. Currently awaiting trial. This document isn't worth the paper it is printed on, and neither is your authority here." Preston stepped forward, puffed up with bravado. "Listen here, you witch. This is my house. I am the trustee. I want you out. Now. Or I am pressing charges for harassment." Evelyn turned to face him. She was shorter than him, but at that moment she looked 10 feet tall. She placed her leather briefcase on the table right on top of the deed I was supposed to sign. "Your house," she repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. She clicked the latches of the briefcase open. Snap, snap. The sound was loud in the silent room. "You seem to be laboring under a significant misunderstanding, Mr. Bennett." She reached into the briefcase and pulled out a laptop. One of her assistants stepped forward and plugged it into the large television mounted above the fireplace. Preston frowned. "What is this? What are you doing?" Evelyn opened the laptop. The screen flickered to life. "You are right about one thing," Evelyn said, her voice icy. "Catherine was a housewife, but she was also a woman who knew exactly who her children were, and she knew exactly what you would do the moment she was gone." Preston scoffed. "This is ridiculous." "Get out of my house," Evelyn pressed a key on the laptop. "It is not your house," Evelyn said calmly, looking Preston dead in the eye. "And before you say another word, I suggest you watch this. It explains everything, including why you are about to lose a lot more than just this property." She turned the laptop screen toward us. On the TV, a video file began to play. The timestamp was from 4 weeks ago. The room went deathly silent. Even Todd stopped breathing. I sat back in my chair and capped the pen. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. I looked at Preston. "Watch closely, son," I said softly. "Mom has something to tell you." Evelyn pressed the space bar on the silver laptop, and the large television screen mounted above the fireplace flickered to life. The static cleared to reveal a bedroom. My bedroom. Sitting in the armchair by the window wearing her favorite blue cashmere cardigan was Catherine. The video was dated just 4 weeks ago. She looked frail, the oxygen tube draped around her neck like a translucent necklace, but her eyes were sharp. They were bright, with a fierce intelligence that I had missed every single minute of the last 3 days. Preston scoffed loudly, crossing his arms. "What is this? A goodbye message? We do not have time for sentimental home movies. We have a schedule to keep." "Shut up," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made Preston blink and step back. On the screen, Catherine adjusted her glasses and looked directly into the camera lens. It felt like she was looking right at me, right through the screen and into my soul. "Hello, Harrison. Hello, children. Hello. If you are watching this video, it means I am gone. And if you are watching this in the presence of Evelyn Shaw, it means my worst fears have come true. It means you have tried to corner your father." Mallory shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, clutching her phone. "This is creepy," she muttered. "Can we turn it off?" "It is just Mom rambling." Evelyn stood like a statue beside the television, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "No one touches the remote," she said. Catherine continued on the screen. You all know me as a mother and a housewife. You know me as the woman who baked cookies for the PTA and clipped coupons to save 50 cents on laundry detergent. You thought our life was simple. You thought your father supported us entirely on his engineer's salary. And he did. He built this house and he put food on the table. But there is a part of my life I never shared with any of you because I wanted to protect you from the corruption that easy money brings. Preston rolled his eyes. Money. What money? Mom didn't have money. She had a checking account with $200 in it. Catherine seemed to answer him from beyond the grave. In 1992, when my uncle died and left me $10,000, I did not put it in a savings account like I told you. I invested it. I became a silent partner in a small shipping and logistics company that was just starting out in the port of Seattle. I stared at the screen. I was stunned. 30 years of marriage and she had never breathed a word of this. The company grew, Catherine said, a small, proud smile touching her pale lips. It grew very fast. We handle supply chains for major tech firms now. I reinvested every single penny of my dividends for 30 years. I never touched it. I wanted it to be a surprise for our retirement Harrison. I wanted us to see the world without worrying about the cost. Preston stood up slowly. His face had gone pale. Logistics. You mean like global shipping containers? Catherine took a breath, and I could see the pain in her chest, but she pushed through it. As of this morning, the valuation of my share in the company combined with the diversified portfolio Evelyn manages for me stands at $14,500,000. The silence that fell over the living room was heavy. It was the suffocating silence of a bomb that has detonated, but the shockwave hasn't hit you yet. 14.5 million, Preston whispered. His voice trembled. He looked at Todd. Todd looked like he was going to vomit. The color had drained from his face, leaving him a sickly gray. Mallory dropped her phone. It hit the floor with a loud thud, but she didn't even look down. That is impossible, Preston stammered. She was just Mom. She was smarter than all of you combined, I said quietly. My heart swelled with a pride so intense it hurt. My wife, the secret tycoon. On the screen, Catherine leaned closer to the camera. That is the total estate value, $14.5 million. And it is all sitting in the Bennett Family Trust. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air of hostility and impatience evaporated, replaced by a thick, oily greed. I watched the transformation happen in real time, and it was grotesque. Preston's posture changed. He stopped looking like a bully and started looking like a starving dog who had just smelled a steak. He turned to me. His eyes were wide, shining with a frantic artificial light. Dad, he said, his voice cracking. Did you know? Why didn't you tell us? I didn't know, I said. Preston let out a breathless laugh. 14 million. Dad, do you realize what this means? We are rich. I mean, you are rich. We are a rich family. He walked over to me. He reached out and brushed a speck of dust from my dirty work jacket. His hands were gentle now, revering. He looked at me like I was a golden idol. You shouldn't be sitting in this old chair, Dad, he said quickly. Todd, get Dad a cushion. Mallory, get him some water. Jesus, look at him, he looks dehydrated. Mallory sprang into action. She ran to the kitchen. I am getting the Fiji water, the cold one. Todd was suddenly at my side, kneeling like a squire before a king. Harrison, are you comfortable? Is the room too cold? I can turn up the heat. I am sorry about the car. Truly, it was a misunderstanding. We can get it back. I will call the guy right now. We will buy it back for $20,000, whatever it takes. I looked at them. 2 minutes ago, they were forcing me to sign away my home and shipping me off to a hospice to die. Now that they smelled money, I was suddenly their beloved patriarch again. It made my stomach turn. Preston was pacing the room, vibrating with energy. Okay, so this changes everything. Obviously, we don't need to sell the house. We can renovate it properly. We can hire full-time nurses for Dad. The best care. Private chefs. Dad, you always wanted to go to Italy, right? We can take a private jet. We can go next week. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes hungry. So how do we access the funds? I assume as trustees we have signatory power. We need to transfer some liquidity immediately to cover security. For Dad, of course. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't open her briefcase. She just pointed at the screen. Catherine wasn't finished. On the video, my wife's expression hardened. Her eyes lost their warmth and became steel. I can see you smiling, Catherine said. I can see the wheels turning in your heads. Preston, you are probably thinking about how this pays off your gambling debts. Mallory, you are probably shopping for a new car in your mind. And Todd, well, I imagine you are relieved you won't lose your fingers to that loan shark. Todd flinched violently, looking around the room as if Catherine were actually there, ghost-like and omniscient. But money is not easy to keep, Catherine said, and it is certainly not free. I watched you grow up. I watched you take Harrison's sacrifices for granted. I watched you treat him with disrespect as you got older. And I knew that when I died, you would try to discard him. Preston's smile faltered. Mom, come on. We love Dad. Catherine continued, ignoring his protest from the grave. That is why the trust has strict conditions. Very strict. She paused, coughing slightly. I leaned forward in my chair. I wanted to reach through the screen and hold her hand. The $14.5 million does not go to you, she said. Not a penny of it goes to Preston Bennett, or Mallory Bennett, or their spouses. Preston froze. What? The money, Catherine said, her voice ringing with finality, is tied to the house. And the house is tied to Harrison. I watched Preston's face crumble. The greed turned into confusion, and then into a slow, rising panic. But we are the heirs, Preston squeaked. Catherine shook her head on the screen. The trust stipulates that the entire estate is for the sole benefit of Harrison Bennett for the remainder of his life. And upon his death, the disbursement of the funds depends entirely on one thing. She paused for effect. How he was treated in his final years. Catherine leaned back in her chair. So children, if you are watching this and you have already put your father in a home or sold his house, then I have bad news. You have already triggered the disinheritance clause. Preston looked at Evelyn. That is not legal. You can't do that. Evelyn smiled. It is perfectly legal, Mr. Bennett. It is called a conditional bequest, and I drafted it myself. On the screen, Catherine's voice softened, but the words were a trap snapping shut. But if Harrison is still in his home, if he is happy, and most importantly, if he has a designated caretaker, then that caretaker receives a stipend, a very generous stipend. Preston's eyes lit up again. Caretaker. We can be the caretakers. Dad, we will take care of you. We will move back in. We will take care of you every day. Catherine raised a finger, but she said, The money isn't for you just because you are blood. The caretaker is the person Harrison chooses, the person who was there when no one else was. She looked at the camera with a sadness that broke my heart. And I have a feeling it won't be any of you. The screen went black for a second. Then a text appeared in white letters. Condition 1. The caretaker must have been employed or resident in the home for at least 6 months prior to my death. Preston stared at the screen. Resident. Employed. But we moved out years ago. Mallory gasped. Maria! Preston spun around. What? Maria! Mallory shrieked. The maid. She has lived here for 20 years. They looked at me. I was still sitting in the chair, my hands folded over my stomach. I wasn't the confused old man anymore. I was the man holding the keys to the kingdom. I smiled. I think we need to make a phone call, I said. Preston lunged for the table, grabbing the papers. No, we can fix this. Dad, listen to me. Evelyn stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Sit down, Mr. Bennett, she said. The video isn't finished. The screen flickered again. Catherine was back. And one more thing, she said. Preston sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. What more could there be? If at any point Harrison is declared mentally incompetent by a physician, Catherine said. Todd went white. He looked at the fake certificate on the table. Then an immediate audit of all family members' finances will be triggered by the IRS and the FBI to ensure no elder abuse has occurred. Catherine smiled. Checkmate. The video of Catherine froze on the screen, her final smile lingering like a ghost in the silent living room. The word checkmate seemed to hang in the air, invisible but heavy, crushing the air out of my children's lungs. Preston was the first to break the paralysis. He lunged toward the television, his face twisted in a mix of panic and denial. That is not real, he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. That is deepfake technology. I read about this. You used AI to recreate Mom's voice. You manipulated her image. This is a fraud. Evelyn Shaw didn't even blink. She stood by the fireplace like a statue of justice carved from ice. She tapped the touchpad on her laptop again. The video of Catherine vanished and was instantly replaced by a split-screen view of 4 different camera angles. Preston stopped dead in his tracks. On the top left quadrant of the screen was a high-definition view of the living room from an angle near the floor. It showed Mallory holding her phone, her face contorted in a fake expression of grief as she live-streamed to her followers just an hour ago. The audio played clearly through the television speakers. God, these people are idiots. I just got $500 in donations from some lady in Ohio who sends money to strangers. It is pathetic. Mallory gasped violently, covering her mouth with her hand. Her face went from pale to a deep, shameful crimson. She looked at her phone lying on the coffee table as if it were a venomous snake. That is not me, she squeaked, her voice barely audible. That is out of context. Evelyn ignored her and pointed to the top right quadrant. It showed the kitchen recorded from the top of the cabinets. It showed Preston and Todd leaning over the laptop discussing tax evasion. We hide the cash in the LLC in Delaware. Dad is the fall guy anyway. If anyone asks, we say he signed off on it while he was lucid. Preston's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. He looked at me, then at Evelyn, then back at the screen. The arrogance that had defined him for 40 years was evaporating, leaving behind a terrified little boy who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar. Only this time the cookie jar was a federal crime. But Evelyn was not done. She maximized the bottom screen. This one was different. It wasn't from inside the house. It was grainy footage from the security camera I had installed above the garage door years ago, a camera they had forgotten about in their haste to sell my car. It showed the rain-slicked driveway from this morning. It showed the tow truck dragging my Mustang away. And then it showed me running out in my socks. It showed Preston, the son I had carried on my shoulders, grabbing me by the collar. It showed him shoving me. It showed an old man hitting the wet grass hard. It showed Preston standing over me, wiping his hands with disgust. The room was so quiet I could hear the rain tapping against the window pane. I looked at Preston. He was staring at the image of himself assaulting his father. He couldn't call this a deepfake. He couldn't call this a misunderstanding. It was raw, unedited brutality. Evelyn closed the laptop with a snap that sounded like a judge's gavel. She walked over to the coffee table and picked up the thick stack of documents, the papers they had tried to force me to sign. She held them up for a moment, letting them see the instruments of their own destruction before dropping them back onto the table with a dismissive thud. "You asked about the caretaker clause, Mr. Bennett," Evelyn said, addressing Preston. "You asked if you could move back in and take care of Harrison to access the $14 million. Preston looked up, hope flickering in his eyes like a dying candle. "Yes, we can fix this." I was stressed. I didn't mean to push him. "We can start over. We will move in tonight. We will be the best caretakers in the world." Evelyn shook her head slowly. Her expression was almost pitying. "You didn't listen to the video carefully enough," she said. Catherine's instructions were precise. To qualify as a caretaker, you must have demonstrated care without expectation of reward for a period of 6 months prior to her death. She paused, letting the timeline sink in. "You moved out 10 years ago," Evelyn continued, "and in the 6 months before Catherine died while she was bedridden and in pain, you visited a total of 3 times. I have the logs from the home security system. 3 times, Preston. And every single time you asked for money." Preston slumped back onto the sofa, his legs giving out. "But that is not the worst part," Evelyn said. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming harder, sharper. "Even if you had moved in, the trust has a zero-tolerance policy regarding abuse." She picked up the fake medical certificate, the one signed by the disgraced Dr. O'Connell. "Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the Bennett Family Trust," Evelyn recited from memory. "Any beneficiary or potential beneficiary who engages in physical, emotional, or financial abuse of the primary beneficiary, Harrison Bennett, shall be immediately and permanently disinherited." She pointed at the certificate. "Conspiring to declare a mentally competent person insane for financial gain is fraud," Evelyn said. "It is also a form of severe emotional abuse." She pointed at the TV screen where the image of Preston shoving me was frozen. "And that," she said, pointing at the frozen violence, "is physical assault." Evelyn turned to face them fully. Her posture was rigid, her eyes blazing. "By your actions over the last 48 hours, you have not only disqualified yourselves from being caretakers, you have triggered the forfeiture clause. You have effectively disinherited yourselves. You get nothing. No house, no trust fund, no insurance payout. The $14.5 million is locked away from you forever." The word "forever" hung in the room. For a moment, nobody moved. They were trying to process the magnitude of the loss. They weren't just losing a potential windfall. They were losing the safety net they had always assumed would be there. They had lived their lives recklessly spending money they didn't earn because they thought that one day, when the old man died, they would be bailed out. Now the parachute was gone, and they were in freefall. The sound that broke the silence was a low, guttural moan from the corner of the room. It came from Todd. My son-in-law was standing by the window, clutching the curtains as if he were trying to hold himself upright. His face was the color of old ash. Sweat was pouring down his forehead, soaking the collar of his expensive shirt. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no. This can't happen." He looked at Preston, his eyes wide and wild. "You said it was a done deal. You told me the money was guaranteed. You told me to borrow the $400,000 against the inheritance because it would be in our accounts by Wednesday." Preston rubbed his temples, looking down at the floor. "I thought it was Todd. Mom tricked us." "Tricked you," Todd screamed, pushing himself away from the wall. His voice was high, hysterical. "She didn't trick you. You are just an idiot. You and your sister are the 2 stupidest people I have ever met." Todd turned to Mallory, who was still staring at her phone, paralyzed by the destruction of her online reputation. "And you," Todd yelled, pointing a shaking finger at his wife. You and your stupid live stream. You recorded everything. You gave them the evidence. Mallory looked up, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. Don't yell at me, Todd. I was trying to build a narrative. I was trying to help. Help. Todd laughed, a manic, terrifying sound. You helped us right into prison, Mallory. Do you know what happens when I don't pay the Greeks tomorrow? Do you know what they do? He held up his hand, splaying his fingers. They take these. They cut them off with bolt cutters. And then they take the car. And then they come for the house. He paced the room frantically, running his hands through his hair. I am dead. I am literally dead. I have zero equity. I maxed out the credit cards to pay for your staging company, Preston. I paid for the movers. I paid for the notary. I spent my last $5,000 on this charade. He turned to me. He looked at me sitting in the armchair, the same chair he had tried to evict me from. He didn't see a father-in-law anymore. He saw a lifeline that had been cut. Harrison, please, he begged, falling to his knees. His expensive suit pants hit the rug with a thud. You have to help me. You heard her. 14 million. You can write a check. Just a small loan. $500,000. I will pay you back, I swear. Just save me from these guys. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sold my Mustang for scrap metal 3 hours ago. I looked at the man who had laughed when I fell in the mud. I leaned forward slightly. I don't have a checkbook, Todd, I said calmly. My accounts are frozen, remember? I am mentally incompetent. Todd stared at me, his mouth open. But you are not... That was fake. I shrugged. You have a signed certificate from a doctor saying I am a vegetable. If I wrote you a check now, it would be invalid. You made sure of that. Todd let out a strangled sob. He realized the irony. He had built the trap so well that he had caught himself in it. He stood up slowly. The desperation in his eyes was replaced by a blind, white-hot rage. He looked around the room for someone to blame, someone to hurt someone, to make pay for his ruin. He looked at Evelyn, but the sheriff was standing right behind her, his hand hovering near his holster. He looked at me, but I was sitting calmly untouchable. So he turned to the person closest to him. He turned to the person whose vanity had captured the evidence that destroyed him. He turned to Mallory. You stupid, useless cow, he hissed. Mallory stood up, indignant. Don't you dare talk to me like that. I am a victim here too. I lost my inheritance. You lost your inheritance, Todd screamed. I lost my life. He swung his hand. It wasn't a slap. It was a backhand, a violent, uncontrolled strike fueled by the terror of a man who knows his life is over. His knuckles connected with Mallory's cheekbone with a sickening crack that echoed off the high ceilings. Mallory flew backward, crashing into the coffee table. The bottle of Dom Perignon tipped over, spilling expensive champagne all over the legal documents, ruining the deed aimed at stealing my house. She lay on the floor, holding her face, screaming in shock and pain. Preston jumped back, terrified of his brother-in-law. Todd stood there, chest heaving, staring at his shaking hand. Sheriff Miller moved. He moved faster than a man of his size should be able to. In 2 strides, he was across the room. He grabbed Todd by the shoulder and spun him around, slamming him face first into the wall. You are under arrest, the sheriff barked, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. For what? Todd yelled, struggling. She is my wife. For assault in the presence of a law enforcement officer, Miller said, clicking the cuffs tight. And based on what I just saw on that TV screen, we are going to add elder abuse conspiracy to commit fraud and grand larceny to the list. Todd slumped against the wall, all the fight draining out of him. He looked at me one last time. His eyes were empty. Harrison, he whispered. Please. I looked at him. I looked at Mallory sobbing on the floor or covered in champagne and broken glass. I looked at Preston cowering in the corner. The structural integrity of this family had completely failed. The roof had caved in. The walls had crumbled, and I was the only one left standing in the ruins. I looked at Evelyn. Get them out of here, I said. The silence that followed the click of the handcuffs was heavy and suffocating. Todd was slumped against the wall, his expensive suit rumpled, and his spirit broken. Mallory was still on the floor, clutching her swelling cheek, her whimpers the only sound in the room. But my eyes were fixed on Preston, my firstborn, the boy I had named after my own father. He stood alone in the center of the wreckage, vibrating with a terror that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. He looked at Todd being read his rights. He looked at Mallory broken on the floor. And then he looked at me. For the first time in his life, Preston realized he was not the protagonist of this story. He was the villain. And the villain had just lost. His knees hit the floor. It wasn't a graceful movement. He collapsed as if his strings had been cut. He crawled toward me, ignoring the spilled champagne soaking into his trousers. He reached for my hand, the same hand he had shoved away in the driveway only hours before. Dad. He choked out, tears streaming down his face. Dad, please. You can't let them do this. We are family. I am your son. I looked down at him. I didn't pull my hand away. I let him hold it. I wanted him to feel the warmth of the man he had tried to freeze out. You are my son, I said softly. That is true. But being a son is a biological fact, Preston. Being family is a choice. And you made your choice when you knocked me into the mud and laughed. Preston squeezed my hand tighter, his desperation making his grip painful. I was scared, Dad. I made a mistake. I can fix it. I will fix everything. I will get rid of Todd. I will take care of you. I swear on Mom's grave I will be the best caretaker you have ever seen. I will cook for you. I will drive you anywhere you want to go. Just tell the lawyer to stop. Tell her we are the caretakers. I looked at Evelyn. She was watching us with a neutral expression, waiting for my command. She knew what was coming. She knew the final piece of the trap had to be sprung by me. I gently pulled my hand from Preston's grip. I leaned back in my old armchair, the leather creaking familiarly beneath me. I crossed my legs. You want to be my caretaker, I said. Yes. Preston nodded frantically, wiping his nose on his sleeve. Yes. Me and Mallory. We will do it. We are the only ones who can. I looked around the room. I looked at the grand chandelier. I looked at the portrait of Catherine over the mantel. But the trust is very specific. Preston, I said, my voice calm and conversational. It says the caretaker must be the person who cared for me when I had nothing. The person who fed me when I was hungry. The person who ensured I had a voice when others tried to silence me. Preston nodded eagerly. We can do that. We will do that starting right now. I shook my head slowly. You cannot start now, son. The test is already over. The papers have been graded, and you failed. I turned my head toward the kitchen door, the same door Mallory had walked through with her poisoned soup. Maria, I called out. You can come in now. The kitchen door swung open. Preston froze. He twisted around on his knees. Maria stood there. She was wearing her simple gray uniform, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. She was a small woman, 60 years old, with hands roughened by decades of scrubbing floors and washing dishes. She had worked for us for 20 years. She had raised these children more than I care to admit. And for 20 years, they had looked right through her as if she were a piece of furniture. Preston looked confused. Maria, what is she doing here? She is just the maid. I stood up. My legs felt strong. I walked over to Maria and placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at me, her dark eyes filled with worry. Mr. Harrison, she whispered, are you okay? Do you need water? I smiled at her. This woman who had just watched a family destroy itself was still asking if I was thirsty. I am fine, Maria, I said. I want you to come sit down. I guided her to the sofa, stepping over the mess Mallory had made. Preston watched us, his mouth hanging open. "Dad, what are you doing?" Preston asked, his voice rising in panic. "Why is she sitting down?" I turned to face him. "When you cut the phone lines, I said Maria gave me her personal cell phone so I could call Evelyn. When you locked me in the basement, Maria came down the back stairs and unlocked the door so I could use the bathroom. When you tried to starve me into submission, Maria hid sandwiches in the garage for me." I looked at Preston, letting the weight of my words crush him. "She risked her job. She risked her livelihood. And she did it because she possesses the one thing you lack: decency." I turned to Evelyn. "Miss Shaw," I said, "who is the designated caretaker under the terms of the Catherine Bennett Trust?" Evelyn opened a folder. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Based on the sworn affidavit provided by Maria Gonzalez regarding the events of the last 6 months and the corroborating evidence of her assistance during your confinement," Evelyn stated clearly. "Maria Gonzalez is the sole qualifying individual." Preston screamed. "No, that is insane. She is the help. You can't give the money to the maid. That is our money." I walked back to the coffee table. I picked up the pen. Not the cheap ballpoint they had tried to give me earlier, but my Mont Blanc. I pulled a fresh document from Evelyn's briefcase. It was a disbursement order. I looked at Maria. She was shaking her head, tears in her eyes. "Mr. Harrison, no, I don't want anything. I just wanted you to be safe." "That is exactly why you deserve it," I said. I uncapped the pen. I wrote the number 2 followed by 6 zeros. $2 million, I said aloud as I wrote. Preston let out a sound like a wounded animal. 2 million. "Dad, are you crazy? That is my inheritance. That is Mallory's money." I signed my name at the bottom. The ink flowed smoothly, black and permanent. "It was never your money, Preston," I said, handing the paper to Evelyn. "It was Catherine's money. And now it is Maria's money. She can retire. She can send her grandchildren to college. She can go back to Mexico and build a villa on the beach. She can do whatever she wants." I turned to Preston. "As for the remaining 12.5 million, I continued. The trust stipulates that if the primary beneficiary, that is me, retains capacity, I have full discretion." Preston scrambled up from his knees. He wiped his face, trying to compose himself, trying one last angle. Okay. 2 million for Maria. Fine. That is generous, Dad. But the rest, the 12 million, we can manage that for you. We can invest it. We are family, Dad. You can't cut us out completely." I looked at him. I looked at Mallory, who had stopped crying and was listening intently. I looked at Todd in handcuffs. They still didn't get it. They still thought this was a negotiation. I looked at Evelyn. "What is the balance for Preston, Mallory, and Todd?" I asked. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. She looked at a separate ledger. "Well," she said, "we have to deduct the cost of the unauthorized estate appraisal. We have to deduct the legal fees for the fraudulent medical certificate. We have to deduct the cost of the tow truck service you ordered illegally. And we have to deduct the emotional distress damages for Mr. Bennett." She tapped a key on her calculator. "The final figure is 0, Evelyn said. "Actually, it is negative. You collectively owe the estate $4,000 in legal fees." 0, Preston whispered. I walked over to the front door. I opened it wide. The rain had stopped. The air outside was fresh and clean, smelling of wet pine and ozone. I turned back to the room. "Sheriff Miller," I said. The sheriff stepped forward, his hand still on Todd's arm. "Yes, Mr. Bennett, these people," I said, gesturing to my children. "They do not live here. They are not welcome here, and they are currently disturbing the peace of the legal homeowner." I looked Preston in the eye. "I want them removed. Immediately." Preston gasped. "Dad, you are kicking us out. Where will we go? Todd's house is going to be seized. Mallory has no money. I have nowhere to go. I looked at him with the same cold detachment he had shown me when he ordered the moving truck. There is a shelter downtown, I said. It is called the Golden Horizon. Oh wait, no, that was the nursing home you picked for me. The shelter is down the street from there. I hear they have soup. Preston stared at me. He looked for a trace of a joke, a hint of mercy. He found none. Sheriff, I said, please escort the trespassers off my property. Sheriff Miller nodded. He pulled Todd toward the door. He signaled to his deputy to grab Preston. Let's go, folks, Miller barked. You heard the man. Move it. Preston resisted for a second. Dad! Dad, please get out, I roared. The sound of my voice, filled with the thunder of a lifetime of betrayal, shook the walls. Preston flinched. He stepped back. He looked at me one last time, and he saw the steel structure of the man he had underestimated. He turned and walked out the door, his head hung low. Mallory scrambled after him, clutching her ruined shoes, not daring to look at me. Todd was dragged out in cuffs. I watched them go. I watched them walk down the driveway past the empty spot where my Mustang used to be, and onto the wet street. I stood in the doorway until they were gone, until the police car lights faded, until the silence returned. But this time it wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a sanctuary. I turned back into the room. Maria was still sitting on the sofa, holding the check, weeping softly. Evelyn was packing up her briefcase. I closed the door. I locked it. I walked over to the fireplace and looked at the painting of the lighthouse. We did it, Catherine, I whispered. The house is clean. I turned to Maria. Maria, I said gently, stop crying. We have work to do. She looked up, sniffing. What work, Mr. Harrison? I smiled. I am hungry, and I think I can finally afford to order a pizza. Extra cheese. Maria laughed. It was a wet, shaky sound, but it was real. I will call, she said. I sat down in my chair. The war was over. I had lost my children, but I had found my dignity. And sitting there in the quiet house, I realized that was a trade I was willing to make. It has been 30 days since I watched the police escort my children off my property, and exactly 24 hours since I signed the final closing papers for the house. I sold it to a nice young couple with a baby on the way. When I handed them the keys, I expected to feel a wave of sadness or a pang of regret for the 40 years of memories trapped within those walls. But as I walked down the driveway for the last time, I felt lighter than I have felt in decades. It was as if I had been carrying a backpack full of bricks, and someone had finally cut the straps. That house was a monument to a life that no longer existed, and staying there would have only turned me into a ghost haunting my own hallways. I did not leave the city immediately. There were a few loose ends to tie up. The most difficult one was visiting the King County Detention Center. Preston is currently being held without bail. It turns out that when Todd's loan sharks realized they were not getting paid, they did not cut off his fingers. Instead, they anonymously tipped off the FBI about Preston's fraudulent accounting practices. The investigation was swift and brutal. They found evidence of wire fraud, embezzlement, and a Ponzi scheme he had been running to fund his lavish lifestyle. I sat behind the glass partition and looked at my son. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. He looked small. He looked like a child who had played a game he did not understand and lost everything. He begged me to hire him a lawyer. He begged me to use the trust fund to bail him out. I picked up the phone receiver and looked him in the eye. I told him that the trust fund was for family, and that he had made it very clear in the driveway that day that he did not consider me family. I told him that facing the consequences of his actions was the only inheritance I had left to give him. Then I hung up the phone and walked away while he screamed silently behind the glass. Mallory did not fare much better. With her reputation destroyed by the exposure of her lies, and her husband facing conspiracy charges, she lost everything. Her followers abandoned her. Her brand deals evaporated. I saw her yesterday. I was stopping at the local supermarket to buy a bottle of water. She was standing at register 4, wearing a green apron, scanning a bag of frozen peas for a customer. She looked tired. She looked aged. She saw me standing near the automatic doors. For a second, our eyes locked. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just looked down at the scanner and kept working. I didn't go over to her. I didn't offer to save her. I just walked out to the parking lot. I had raised them to be strong, but somewhere along the way I had enabled them to be weak. Now life was teaching them the lessons I should have taught them years ago. But today is not about them. Today is about me. I am standing in the middle of the most exclusive classic car showroom in Seattle. The air smells of premium wax leather and high-octane gasoline. It is a cathedral of horsepower. The salesman, a young man with a sharp suit and a skeptical expression, has been trailing me for 10 minutes. He sees an old man in a simple jacket, and he assumes I am just a window shopper. He assumes I am here to relive my glory days before getting into a sensible sedan and driving home to a nursing home. He is wrong. I stop in front of the center display, and there she is, a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback. She is not the car I lost. She is better. Her paint is a deep, flawless candy apple red that looks wet under the showroom lights. Her chrome bumpers shine like mirrors. She has been fully restored with a modern suspension and a high-performance crate engine that puts out 400 horsepower. She is a beast disguised as a beauty. The salesman steps forward, checking his watch. "Beautiful car, sir," he says, his tone dismissive. But she is a serious machine, not really a Sunday driver. And the price tag reflects that. I run my hand over the fender. I feel the cold, smooth steel. It feels like electricity. "How much?" I ask. The salesman sighs. She is listed at $85,000. Firm. I look at the car. I think about the $15,000 Todd sold my old one for. I think about the millions sitting in my account. I think about the freedom that money can buy when you stop using it to buy people's love. "I will take it," I say. The salesman blinks. "Excuse me." "I will take it," I repeat, turning to face him. "I want it prepped and ready to drive in an hour." He chuckles nervously. "Well, sir, we would need to run a credit check, and financing usually takes about 24 hours, so..." I reach into my jacket pocket. I pull out my checkbook. The leather cover is worn, but the name printed on the checks inside carries the weight of a man who owns his own destiny. "I don't need financing," I say, uncapping my pen. "I am paying cash. Wire transfer if you prefer. But I am driving this car out of here today." The salesman's attitude changes instantly. He scrambles to get the paperwork. He offers me coffee. He calls me Mr. Bennett with respect. It is funny how money changes the way people see you. But I don't care about his respect. I only care about the keys. An hour later, I am sitting in the driver's seat. The engine roars to life with a deep guttural growl that vibrates through the steering wheel and into my chest. It is the heartbeat of a new life. I shift into first gear. I ease off the clutch. The car rolls forward, eager and powerful. I pull out of the dealership and turn onto the main road. I don't head back to the city. I head west, toward the ocean. I hit the Pacific Coast Highway as the sun begins to set. The sky is a bruising purple and gold. I roll the windows down. The wind rushes in, tangling my gray hair, smelling of salt and seaweed. I press my foot down on the accelerator. The Mustang leaps forward, 50 miles an hour. 60. 70. I am driving fast, but I am in total control. The road stretches out before me, winding along the cliffs, with the vast, endless ocean crashing below. I look at the empty passenger seat. For a moment, I wish Catherine were here to feel this wind. But then I realize she is here. She is in the roar of the engine. She is in the money that bought this freedom. She is in the peace that has finally settled in my heart. I am 70 years old. I have no house. I have no children to care for. I have a suitcase in the trunk and a map in the glove compartment. I can go anywhere. I can see the Grand Canyon. I can drive to New Orleans for jazz. I can drive all the way to Key West and watch the sunrise. For the first time in 40 years, I am not Harrison the provider. I am not Harrison the father. I am not Harrison the victim. I am just Harrison. I tap the steering wheel in time with the rhythm of the engine. A smile spreads across my face. It is not a polite smile. It is a wide, wild grin. They thought they could bury me. They thought they could dismantle me brick by brick. They thought I was just the foundation that held them up, and that I would stay silent while they tore me down. They were wrong. I shift into fifth gear and let the car fly down the highway, leaving the shadows of my past in the rearview mirror. They thought I was an old man who needed to be protected. They forgot that I am the one who designed the shelter they slept under. I poured the concrete. I welded the steel. I built the roof that kept the rain off their heads. And I am the only one who has the right to tear it down. This story reminds us that dignity has no expiration date. Often society and even family can underestimate the elderly, mistaking their silence for weakness and their kindness for frailty. But as Harrison showed us, wisdom and experience are formidable weapons. The true definition of family isn't determined by DNA, but by behavior, respect, and loyalty. We must never take the people who support us for granted, because the hand that builds the roof is also the hand that can dismantle it. Treat your elders with the reverence they deserve, not as assets to be liquidated, but as the architects of your life. If this story made you cheer for Harrison's victory, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever seen someone underestimate an older person and instantly regret it? I want to hear your stories. Leave a comment below with your city and let me know whose side you were on. See you in the next video.